All right, so these days we're doing the mitzvah every day of Sfiras Omer. For 49 days, in the evening, we declare, Hayoim, today is so and so many days to the Omer. Now, everybody is probably familiar that after you say so and so many days to the Omer, there are 4 paragraphs in the Siddur. The first paragraph is, Hashem should return to us the avodah, the service in the temple, in the Beis Hamikdash, which the context over here is that we're counting from the Omer. What does counting from the Omer mean? You're counting from the time that the Omer was offered in the Beis Hamikdash. So nowadays our whole counting is a little bit inauthentic, maybe because we didn't actually bring an Omer, so we're counting from a theoretical date. So the first thing we say is that we should go back to having the authentic Omer in the Beis Hamikdash. And then there's 3 paragraphs. Which is Tehillim Kapitel Samach Zayin 67. Then there's Ana B'Choyach. And Ana B'Choyach is 7 lines. Each line is 6 words. So it's a total of 42 words, followed by Baruch Shem. And then we have a Rebbeinu Shel Olam, in which we ask Hashem that we have the mitzvah of Sfira, whose purpose is to purify ourselves. And there are 49 sort of subcategories of purification, Chesed Shebechesed, Gvura Shebechesed, etc., all the way through Malchus Shebemalchus. And we say this prayer 49 times, and each one of them focusing on a specific thing. Now, all of these, with the exception of the Harachamon, the first thing that you're saying we should be doicha back to the Avodas Beis Hamikdash, all of these things are not in the original text of Sfiras Omer. Meaning to say, if you go back in the very earliest Sidurim that we have, whether it's Reb Amram Goin or the Machzavitri, let's call them pre-Arizal Sidurim, all of this is absent, right? If you look, for example, the Machzavitri, which we've discussed many times, it's the Siddur of the school of Rashi. It says, you say Sfiras Omer, and then it says, Yehiratzon Sheibana Beis Hamikdash, so kind of the similar thing, not exactly the same text that we say, but basically a prayer for the return of the service in the Beis Hamikdash, and that's it. There is nothing more. So all of these additions, these 3 paragraphs, Tehillim, chapter 67, Ana B'Choyach and Rebbeinu Shel Olam, are the influence of the Arizal. Now, what makes Sfiras Omer different than all other influences of the Arizal on davening is how widespread it is. What I mean by that is like this. The original teachings of the Arizal, we discussed this on Shabbos afternoon a couple of weeks ago. The Arizal did not write pen or siddur. The Arizal gave instructions of different kavanos. Maybe you could translate that as intentions or intentionalities. I'm not sure exactly what the right translation for kavanos is, but heretofore we'll just use the word kavanos. The Arizal instructed many different kavanos to think about and to meditate upon during the performance of certain mitzvahs and of davening, etc. And it's all very deep Kabbalistic stuff, all the different names of God and intertwined and interplayed with each other, and gematria is all very, very deep mystical stuff that would be way over the head of most of the people in this room, maybe all the people in this room. And that's what the Arizal taught. Now, the next step in the chain is that there started to be a thing called Sidurei HaArizal. That means there were Mukubalim, Kabbalists, who created a Siddur within the Siddur, 2 things. First of all, primarily, the primary point of it was that in the Siddur you had published all the kavanos of the Arizal. So on every page in the Siddur it says, according to the Arizal, when you say this section of davening, this is what you should be meditating upon. These are the Kabbalistic thoughts that you're supposed to be contemplating right now. And there were a few of these. The famous ones are the Siddur Reb Osher, the Siddur Reb Shamsi, and there's others as well. Now, those Siddurim were used by people who were very proficient in Kabbalah. Most people were just using a regular Siddur like this. The next step in the game is, and this is where the Alter Rebbe Siddur comes into the picture, is that we're publishing Siddurim which don't have any kavanos. It's written for regular people like me and you. It's not there to have these kavanos in it. But we want at least the text of the Siddur should match up the way the Arizal would have wanted you to say the text. So let's say the Arizal says that in I don't know, in Baruch Shama, you should think about such and such because there's so many words, so and so many words in Baruch Shama. So I'm going to print a siddur where the text of Baruch Shama has the amount of words that result. Yeah, there's different nuschos within Baruch Shama, so I'm going to choose the one that matches with the amount of words or letters that the Arizal says to have. Right. So when we say that our siddur that we use the Chabad Minhag Siddur, the Tilas Hashem Siddur, is Al Pi Nusach Arizal. It virtually has no kavanos in our Siddur. And almost nowhere in our Siddur, we'll see soon a couple of exceptions, but almost nowhere does it say this is what you should think about right now and give you these Kabbalistic thoughts. But the text is refined to be according to that should match what the kavanos of the Arizal are. Now, many people did this. The Alter Rebbe is one of the people who did it, and the Alter Rebbe famously spent a lot of time on it and used very many different versions of the Siddur HaRizal in order to curate the most perfect possible Siddur that's done al Pi Nusach HaRizal. Now, another important introduction to understand what we're saying is that what we have in our hand, this is not the Alter Rebbe Siddur. This is the Tilas Hashem Siddur, which the text of this Siddur, it matches the text of the Alter Rebbe Siddur. But the Alter Rebbe Siddur, if you've ever seen the Siddur Torah that's the Alter Rebbe Siddur, which has been printed many times over. But the Tilas Hashem, there are some variants, some appropriate, some are mistakes, but it's not in the same order as the Alter Rebbe Siddur. There are many things in the Alter Rebbe Siddur that are omitted from here. There's instructions there in the Alter Rebbe Siddur that are summarized over here, not verbatim, etc. This is not, when we refer to the Alter Rebbe Siddur, we're not talking about this. This just has the text of davening is supposed to be the same as the Alter Rebbe Siddur. There are some differences, but that's going to be beyond the scope right now. Now, a hallmark of the Alter Rebbe Siddur is Shaveh L'chol Nefesh. That everything in the Alter Rebbe Siddur was designed to be something that's relevant and applicable to everybody. Which is why the Alter Rebbe didn't include kavanos, even though the Alter Rebbe himself davened with the kavanos, and even in our lifetime, the Rebbe also, there were certain times when the Rebbe did use. For example, when the Rebbe blew shofar, the Rebbe brought a Siddur HaRizal onto the bima, and I don't know exactly what the Rebbe did, but having the kavanos HaRizal in front of him while he blew shofar was relevant to the Rebbe. It's not relevant to me, right? So the Alter Rebbe didn't include it in his Siddur. Even, by the way, even before Sfiras Omer, so if you go in other shuls, before Sfiras Omer, they say Hineni Muchana Mezuman, yeah? Chabad, you don't say it. You just start straight from the bracha. Baruch Atah Hashem. We don't say any preparatory prayers before Sfiras Omer. But the Rebbe and the Rabbeim did. I don't know if anybody knows what the Rebbe said precisely, because the Rebbe said it quietly, but it was obvious to people watching, apparently, that the Rebbe was saying something before the actual Sfiras Omer. Now, so again, a hallmark of the Alter Rebbe Siddur is that it's Shaveh L'chol Nefesh, meaning that this is whatever we put in the Siddur here is applicable to everybody. So, for example, and that's why we don't have kavanos. Now, one example that the Rebbe gives is that part of the Alter Rebbe Siddur is the Haggadah. In the Siddur is the Haggadah. So our nusach and minhagim of the Haggadah come from the Alter Rebbe, from the way the Haggadah appeared in the Alter Rebbe Siddur. Now, the truth is that some things we've changed. The Alter Rebbe says in the Haggadah to raise the kaira, and we don't raise it, we just point to it or whatever. But the basis for it is the Haggadah in the Alter Rebbe Siddur. Now over there, the Alter Rebbe says that when you pour out the wine 16 times for Dom V'Eshusim Risoshan and the 10 Makkos and the Zachadash B'Achav, you should have in mind, and he gives you the Kabbalistic thing to keep in mind. So the Rebbe says, from the fact that the Alter Rebbe includes that in his Siddur, it means that for some reason, this kavanah of what you're supposed to keep in mind while you're pouring out the wine is more Shaveh L'chol Nefesh than all the other kavanos of the Arizal. This specific one is something that all of us are supposed to keep in mind. And again, when we talk about that, we could discuss what that is. But I'm just using that as an example to say that the Alter Rebbe Siddur, everything in the Alter Rebbe Siddur is Shaveh L'chol Nefesh. Now, coming back to Sfiras Omer, and the Alter Rebbe writes in the Siddur by Sfiras Omer, just a second. I forgot to bring an actual Alter Rebbe Siddur to the table, but I do have the copy here. And Alter Rebbe writes like this. It says in Alter Rebbe Siddur, it says the bracha like this. It says the bracha. The bracha is printed, and then between the bracha, the first line of verbal text that you say after the bracha is Hayoim Yoim Echad Loimer. Today is day 1 to Loimer, and then it has the 49 numbers. Yeah, but between the bracha and the Yoim Echad Loimer, it says Yechavin l'sfira shelo yisrael. Though you should have in mind the sfira of that night, or the teva echad shalanu b'chayach, and to one word of anu b'chayach, v'teva echad shal mizmor elikim yichanenu, and one word of the Tehillim Elokim Yechanenu, that's Tehillim 67. Va'is Echad, and one letter of the Pasuk Yismuchu, of the Pasuk of Yismuchu. Now, we're going to go through to explain what all those kavanos are, but, or at least on a very basic level. But why is this in the Siddur? If it's in the Siddur, that means Alter Rebbe is saying that it's Shavuot L'chol Nefesh. Now, you could say that just as, okay, the Alter Rebbe decided that this is Shavuot L'chol Nefesh, but I think there's another a different or slightly different perspective of it, on it, if you think about it from a historical context perspective, that the reality is that these prayers of these 3 paragraphs that the Arizal says to say after Sfiras Omer became extremely widespread, and there's much record to this, that it's been published in Sidurim from a very early stage of the printing of Sidurim. These things were included, much more so than any other minhagim of davening that are based on the Arizal. And some poskim even came out against this. Maybe we'll see. The Chok Yaakov was against it. It's like, no, like this. If people who are sort of the stature and of the familiarity with Kabbalah, they want to say these and have these things in mind, that's fine. But why are you printing this in a siddur that is made for everybody? But the Rabbi Yaakov Emden also writes that everybody's saying it. Rabbi Yaakov Emden does embrace it, if I recall correctly. But perhaps one way of looking at why is this included in the Alter Rebbe Siddur is a little bit like this, that the Alter Rebbe couldn't not include it in the Siddur because everybody was saying it already. So the people who are coming, who want to daven the Alter Rebbe's Nusach, everybody is already saying this. And even till today, you go to regular Ashkenaz shuls, what percentage of the people who are davening in, I don't know, Yeshur or Makor, the local Ashkenaz shuls, are actually saying it? I don't know, I didn't make a survey, but it's printed in their Siddur, and it's in all the, certainly many people are saying it, and everybody's aware of it. And if anybody doesn't say it, it's like, whatever. So for whatever reason, however educated they are or they aren't, they're like, for whatever reason, they're making a decision, I'm not going to say this is not important. Everybody considers this, everybody sort of, this is part of the Sfiras Omer. So this was very widespread. And perhaps what the Alter Rebbe is saying is, okay, everybody's saying this, so we're going to include this. But in this case, it doesn't make sense to say it without the kavanos. In other words, when you're saying Baruch Shamar, you don't need to, Baruch Shama is part of davening. You don't need to have kavanos or Arizal in order to say Baruch Shama. We could say, okay, we're going to modify Baruch Shama. There should be the right amount of words to match up what the Arizal says. But here, the Arizal doesn't say you're supposed to say Anu B'chayach, we'll see. You're supposed to have in mind a certain kavana. So to say it without the kavanas is ludicrous. So once it's being included in the Siddur, the Alter Rebbe, quote unquote, has no choice but to say, okay, Yechaven, I'm going to tell you that you have to have in mind these kavanas. Okay, so again, that's maybe a little bit more of a sort of a historical perspective of why the Alter Rebbe is deciding that these kavanos are indeed Shavuot L'chol Nefesh, applicable to everybody. Now, just one thought, one word on why did these things dafka by Sfiras Omer? We don't find that, I don't know, by Lulav or by other things, that the kavanos Arizal spread so far and wide. I think you could maybe say that there's 2 things of the Arizal that spread far and wide in the Siddur that had backlash. The first one is this, and the other is L'Shem Yichud. Now, even L'Shem Yichud is not as popular as this, right? And you go to regular Ashkenazi shuls, they're not saying L'Shem Yichud before every mitzvah, right? But they are saying this. Chabad have an interesting approach to L'Shem Yichud. We say it once a day, but other Chassidim say L'Shem Yichud before every mitzvah. That's the Alter Rebbe discusses that in Tanya chapter 41 for those who wish to further understand the Chabad perspective on the Shem Yichud. Anyway, so perhaps this is just my own suggestion. Take it or leave it. What is the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer all about? I think that from a very simple, raw, pure pshat perspective, Sfiras Omer becomes a difficult mitzvah to relate to. Like you're just counting days, like it's different than other mitzvahs. It's difficult to find meaning and inspiration in the mitzvah. Right now, famously, the Sefer Chinuch, and I think the Rambam in Nevuchim writes something similar. That you're counting. The Omer is about counting the days toward Kabbalah Satorah and preparing for Shavuos. So that's also an attempt to infuse the mitzvah with meaning. Which again, it's true. The Rishonim say it's very true. But to say that is the simple, straightforward, raw core pshat of the mitzvah is a difficult argument to make, because on a very basic level, from a pure pshat perspective, Shavuos isn't necessarily intertwined with Kabbalah Satorah, with receiving the Torah. Shavuos doesn't even, in theory, now we have a fixed calendar, but in theory, Shavuos doesn't even have to coincide with Kabbalah Satorah. So on a pshat level, I think that, again, on a very, very basic pshat level, and I've read a number of articles arguing this point, that on a very, very basic level, the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer is just to keep track. You got to keep track 50 days. The best way of keeping track is that you actually declare it verbally, and that sort of gives it, just like when you let's say separate truma, right? So you don't just take a piece of a portion of the grain and put it aside. You say harez truma. You declare it to be truma. So in theory, I could just keep track of 50 days. But if you actually every day declare the day, then that's a better way of doing it. Yeah.
I don't think it's particularly far-fetched, though. I mean, to get to the pshat that it's Matan Torah, there you have to do a little bit of, you have to be a little flexible interpretation of the sugya. But but then it's connected, you're doing your connecting Pesach to Shavuos, whatever Shavuos is, that is, I think, perfectly within pshat.
Yeah, no, 100%. I agree with that. But either way, my point that I'm trying to make is that I perhaps, again, and maybe more research is needed for this, but perhaps the reason why the Arizal's Sfiras Omer became so popular and widespread was because people were looking for more. Somehow, everything that that was available to them on finding meaning in the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer felt to them lacking, and they were looking for more, and therefore the Arizal offered something new. All right. After all those introductions, let's dive into it. What does the Arizal actually say about Sfiras Omer? And I'm going to be using as the primary text the Shara Kavanos. Now is not the time to explain what the various texts of the Arizal's Torah are and how they came to be. We discussed that on Shabbos a few weeks ago. But I'm going to be using the Shara Kavanos. Now, we have over here three or four, we'll see exactly how to parse it, different kavanos that you're supposed to have in mind. It may not surprise you that if you look in the Shara Kavanos and in the Sidurim of the Arizal, there's a lot more. There's many, many different kavanos and gematrias and shemus to have in mind. Just one example, that when you say the words Baruch Atah Hashem, so when you say Hashem's name in the bracha of Sfiras Omer, you have to have in mind there's different ways of spelling Yud Kei Vav Kei in full. We say this on Friday in the piece of the Zohar that we say before Mincha on Friday. It says the Shema, and it's in parentheses. It spells out that if you do Yud Vav, you spell the Yud Vav Daled, and you spell the Hey Aleph, and then you spell the Vav, etc. You get the full gematria of Yud Kei Vav Kei spelled out is 45. So that when you say the Baruch Atah Hashem of the bracha of Sfiras Omer, that's the spelling of Hashem's name that you're supposed to have in mind. Then it says when you say the word Sfiras Omer is Rosh Tevis Samach Hey 65, which Samach Sfiras HaOmer. So it's 65. 65 is the gematria of Hashem's name, Aleph Daled Nun Yud. So that's what you're supposed to have in mind, etc., etc. It goes on for many pages and way beyond my capacity to fully grasp. The only reason I'm sharing this is to demonstrate that there are numerous kavanos of the Arizal in Sfiras Omer that do not make it into the Siddur. The only ones that are in our Siddur are the kavanos that are relevant to the things that we say. I could say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher Kadosh Mitzvos V'Tzivanu Al Sfiras Omer without having any of that in mind. It's just a regular bracha and a mitzvah. But I can't say Ana B'Chayach without having in mind what I'm supposed to have in mind, because the whole purpose of saying it is in order to have it in mind. Right? Okay. Now, there's going to be one exception to this. one thing that we have in mind that has nothing to do with what we say. And I think here there's a little bit of a mistake. Now, I should mention, again, maybe it's obvious, maybe everybody knows this, but if you open up your Siddur that's in front of you, let's say to page 136, let's look at the first day of the Omer, Hayoim Yom Echad LaOmer. So in this Siddur, it tells you all the things to have in mind. On the bottom right, under the words Hayoim Yom Echad LaOmer, it says Chesed Shebechesed. And then on the left of that same line, you have three things. You have the word Elikim, which is the first word of Tehillim 67. I mean, Lamatzech Mizbul David, that's the introductory verse, but the Elikim is the first of the 49 words of the actual Tehillim. And then it has Ana, that's the first word of Ana B'Chayach, and then it has a Yud, which is the first letter of Yismuchu. And here, if you want, you could pass out these papers. I printed the whole capital of Samach Zayin. I think it might be a better, safer way to say it around here. And then all the Yismuchus and Ana B'Chayach with all the numbers 1 through 49. So you could see, like in each night, let's say tonight, we're going to count 32 days. You could just look for the three occurrences of the number 32 on this page, and that will tell you exactly what you have to have in mind that night. Now, all right. So the first thing that I want to bring to you from the Sha'ar Kavanos is that he says that the 49 days of the Omer, there's 49 Yoim Duchurin and 49 Yoim Nukvin. 49 male, there's the male and the female in the sort of Koima Shlema of the spheros in this spiritual, in the way Kabbalah teaches us the reality of the different worlds, etc. There's these 49 corresponding midos, 49 male, 49 female, which male and female means there needs to be a union between the two. And therefore, on the first week of Sfiras HaOmer, you're supposed to have in mind to bring the hashpah, to bring the, how do you say hashpah in English? To bring the,
Influence?
Okay, influence from the 49, from the chesed of Zachar to the chesed of Nekeva, and the second week it's from Gevura of chesed to Gevura to Nekeva, etc. And then he says, Gam Yechaven Derech Prat, that in addition to the first week you're thinking chesed, the second week you're thinking Gevura, etc., within each week you're supposed to think about the specific, how each one of those 7 is divided into 7. So on the first night you're thinking chesed shebechesed, on the second night you're thinking gvura shebechesed, etc., for 49 days. Now, we are not talking here about perfecting one's own character. That's going to come later. Here we're talking about a spiritual kavanah, that there's this sort of framework of 49 Yom in Duchrin and 49 Yom in Nukvin, and every day you have in mind one corresponding to the other. Now, this maybe is disproving a little bit my theory, because this is the one kavanah that the Alter Rebbe does include in the Siddur that's nothing to do with anything we say, but we will see soon that it does relate to what we are going to say. What I mean by that is like this. The first thing the Alter Rebbe says in the Siddur is that you should think for the sphera of that night. What does it mean that Yechavein should have kavanah for the sphera of that night? What is the sphera of that night? The sphera of that night is this. It refers to this section of the Sha'ar Kavanos. The Alter Rebbe didn't see the Sha'ar Kavanos, but the Alter Rebbe did see the Mishnah Chassidim and the Pri Etz Chaim, where it pretty much says the same thing verbatim. What the Alter Rebbe means is that you should have in mind chesed shebechesed, gvura shebechesed. Every night you should have in mind one of those things as they pertain to the hashpah from the 49 characteristics of Zachar, of male, to the 49 of female. Right? This is not, when the Alter Rebbe says Yechaven, as far as, from my understanding and reading all the available material, when the Alter Rebbe says Yechaven he doesn't mean you should have in mind which sphera of yourself, which aspect of your own character traits you're going to be refining or purifying that night. This is a more abstract Chavana, Chesed Shebechesed, Gvura Shebechesed, from Zachar to Nekeva. Fine. Yeah. Well, one second, just one more thing. Again, I said this before, I just want to emphasize, because we're going to see this as a theme, that there's the general kavanah. The first week you have in mind chesed, second night gvura, second week gvura, etc. And then the Arizal adds. And in addition to the general kavanah for the whole week, we also have a specific kavanah for each night within that week. Yes?
Just when in this conversation we're talking about kavanos, are we saying that the thing we're having in mind are these words, their letters, or this the way they sound, or whatever, or is there some kind of a meaning of what these words mean that we're supposed to have in Kabbalah.
Yes, meaning for us simple folk, it's just the former. Like we don't know exactly what these things mean, but you have in mind the vav of Yismachu. And tonight I'm thinking vav of Yismachu, and I'm sure for the Talmidim of the Arizal it was much more intense than that. But
So how is that even a kavanah?
You're doing the best you can. You're again. We're sort of. We have to have this. So we're thinking vav yismachu. There's many things you find already in the poskim, and certainly in the later poskim, like Yehiratzin should be as if. Yeah, there's even a Yehiratzin from the B'chach Rav that every morning you should say that all the shemus of Hashem that I say today should be as if I had in mind all the kavanos, not the Kabbalistic, the halachic kavanos. And Shulchan Aruch it says when you say Hashem's name, you're supposed to think the meaning of the names. Maybe I'm going to space out sometimes when I say Hashem's name, so it should be as if I had in mind. So it's like, look, we're doing the best we can. We're not expecting, or perhaps even not even encouraging, simple folk like us to become completely proficient in all the kavanos aris. Also, we do the best we can.
Also, so you said that there's kind of two aspects of the kavanah. One aspect when you're thinking about kavanos is my own character traits and how I can improve them. And the other aspect is more of an abstraction, but not necessarily, but it's more to do with Hashem's shefa in the world.
Yeah.
Right? And so the one that I'm supposed to have more in mind is more of the abstraction.
I don't know, more or less. We'll have to finish the whole. But I'm saying at the very beginning, when the Alter Rebbe says "Yechavin l'sfira shelo yiseh halayla," that's what he's referring. As far as I could tell, that's what he's referring to, right? Anyway, I think one of my points, maybe when I'm finished, will sort of all tie stuff together. Okay. Now, then we move on to Anu B'chayach. Now, the interesting thing is, I'll just mention that in all the sources, the kavanos that are related to Anu B'chayach precede the kavanos of Lam Natzeach Meginos. In other words, Tehillim Samach Zayin, we say Tehillim Samach Zayin before Anu B'chayach, and not just us. All Sidurim, and including the Sidur Harizal, pretty much say first the Sfira, the counting, then Lam Natzeach Meginos Elikim Echanenu, and then Anu B'chayach. But when it tells you the kavanos, it's always the other way around. First, it tells you the kavanos of Anu B'chayach, and then it tells you the kavanos of Lam Natzeach. There's one of the Siduri Harizal where Lam Natzeach and Anu B'chayach are printed before the count. First it says Lam Natzeach, then Anu B'chayach, then it says, okay, Baruch Atah Hashem Asviyas Omer Hayom Echad. But this is the way, again, I don't know why. The reality is that when it teaches you the kavanos, it always gives Anu B'chayach first, and followed by Now, basically, what does it tell you to do by Anu B'chayach? So it tells you, and here it might help to look at the papers I handed out with the numbers. You'll see that each line of Anu B'chayach is 6 words, which comprise, the first letter of those 6 words comprise a 6-letter Rosh Tevis, which is printed at the end of the line. And those Rosh Tevis that are printed at the end of the line, it says that you're supposed to envision them as you say Anu B'chayach. Those are Kabbalistic names of Hashem. And so it says that you should have in mind this Anu B'chayach is referred to as the Tefillah of Rabbi Nechunim ben Hakana, who was authored by one of the Tanoim, Rabbi Nechunim ben Hakana, and that actually way precedes the Arizal. I think the Rashba already writes about Anu B'chayach and attributes it to him. So this is a very, very old prayer, but it's a very old prayer in the abstract. When do you actually say this prayer? That's up for discussion. But here it says that you should have in mind one letter of the 42-letter name of Hashem, right? All of this together comprises 42 letters, which are a Kabbalistic name of Hashem. And again, here it splits it into the weekly kavanah and a daily kavanah. It says the first week you should have in mind the first name, which is Aleph Beis Gimel Yud Tav Tzadik. The second week you should have in mind the second name, which is Kuf Reish Ayin Sin Yakra Satan. Right? And then it says, and in addition to that, every night specifically, you should have in mind one word of the line, which is going to comprise at the end of the week the full. So again, this is the theme in general of how these kavanos are working, is that there's a kavanah for the week, and then, okay, within that kavanah, we're going to break it down into 6 or 7, and that's what you got to have in mind every night of that week. I want to emphasize.
6 letters.
Yeah, so here it's different. So on every day of the week, you have in mind one word, Ana, B'chayach, Gedulas thing, and then on the 7th night, you have in mind Abba Yatatz. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but the 6 letters. Now, I need to point out, so what B'chlal, it's important to know, when do you say Ana B'chayach? So you always say Ana B'chayach after we never say Anu B'Choyach, as far as I know, we never say it on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and you always say it after a weekday thing that needs elevating. So, for example, before Shabbos, that's before Shabbos. Kabbalah Shabbos is designed. We do a corrupt Kabbalah Shabbos. We do it by night, but Kabbalah Shabbos is meant to be said before sunset or as sunset happens. Yeah, so we say 6 chapters of Tehillim before the Chadodi, which correspond to the 6 days of the week, and then after those 6, we say Anu B'Choyach. Now, there's other times also in the Alter Rebbe Siddur, by the way, it says in the very first print of the Alter Rebbe Siddur, it says to say Anu B'Choyach after Kiddush Levana. In practice, we don't do that. Some people say Anu B'Choyach after Neiras Chanukah. We also don't do that. Whatever the case is. But here's a very important point. Nowhere in any of the kavanos Arizal, not in Pri Etz Chaim, not in Shar Kavanos, not in Mishras Chassidim, nowhere does it say that you're supposed to say Anu B'Choyach after Sfiras Omer. It just says that you're supposed to be mechavein to the specific word or name or whatever, depending on the night, of Anu B'Choyach. So Anu B'Choyach is not really about a recitation, it's more about a kavanah. So this kind of further underscores my point that I was saying, that it doesn't make sense, the Alter Rebbe has to include the kavanas, because it doesn't make sense to include Anu B'Choyach without the kavanas. The only reason you're saying, the reason I've even said to say Anu B'Choyach, he just said to be mechaven to a specific word or letters of Anu B'Choyach. So why are we saying it? Presumably because you can't really think about it if you're not saying it, right? So we say it. But it's more, at its core, it's about a kavanah, not about a verbal recitation, right? By the way, it's interesting to note that we mentioned L'Chadaydi, Kabbalah Shabbos. The Arizal also doesn't say to say Anu B'Choyach on Friday night, but Kabbalah Shabbos. He says that while you say the last of those 6 kapitlach, which is Kapitel Chavtes 29, yeah, Mizmor David Havel Hashem B'nei Elim, over there it says, I think 7 times, Koil, or I forget exactly which word it says 7 times, maybe Koil Hashem, and by each one of those 7 things, you're supposed to have in mind one of the 7 parts of the Shemus of Anu B'Choyach. Right? He doesn't say to say Anu B'Choyach, but the Sidurei Ha'arizal extrapolated from that you're supposed to say Anu B'Choyach after Mizmor David. Right? Okay. Now then,
do all the Sidurim do that after?
Yes, that's another. Bichlal, Kabbalah Shabbos, in general, Kabbalah Shabbos is another aspect of the, not strictly Arizal, because at least certain parts of it were certainly there before the Arizal as well, meaning, but from the Tzfas school of Mukabalim, from the Ramak, Reb Shlomo Alkabatz, that Kabbalah, that influenced pretty much the whole Klal Yisrael. In the day, for example, the Ramah, when he came to shul on Friday night, he davened Ma'ariv as he did every other night of the week. He started with Baruch Hu and he said Ma'ariv. The whole idea that before Ma'ariv on Shabbos there's a text for Kabbalah Shabbos is innovation of the Mukubalim of Tzfas, which is something which even people as distant from those things, such as the Tyre gentleman sitting to my left, also indulge in that, at least officially. Now, yeah.
Talk about saying Anu B'Choyach in the morning.
You're right. We do say it after kavanos. You're right. Yeah. Okay. So then that's not correct. Okay. Now, then the next thing that it says to say in kavanos Arizal, in the Shar Kavanos, is gam toiv derst, gam toiv la'adam. It is also good for the person lechavein b'memtes yom melo, to think in these 49 days lesaken es shechata b'chol sheva asfiros, to be masaken, to rectify that which you have sinned in all of the 7 sephiros. Now here, again, in the Shar Kavanos, there is no prayer to be said in this regard. This is just a kavanah that you're supposed to think about to rectify that which you have been poigim, that which you have created blemish in the sphera. But I think it's quite clear and obvious that this is the basis for the prayer that we say, which literally includes those words, Yusukat masha bagamti b'sphera ploni, right? That we should fix that which I have blemished in this and this sphera. Okay, so this last kavanah of the Arizal corresponds to what then developed into this Rebbeinu Shel Olam that we say at the end of Sfiras Omer. And I'm going to get back to that. But before I get back to that, I want to go all the way to the end of the Shar Kavanos. And over there, the Shar Kavanos says that, also it's very important, Loimar, to say after Sfiras Omer, the chapter of Elikim Yichanenu, Tehillim Samach Zayin, 6, 7, and hopefully we'll have one to, yeah, and, okay, Tehillim 67, and to have in mind, two things. First of all, that from Elikim Yichanenu all the way through the end is 49 words, and to have in mind each day one of those words. And in addition, within that capital, you have the pasuk Yismuchu, which has 49 letters, and you should have in mind every night one of those letters. And again, if you look at the papers I handed out, you have that numbered. So the first paragraph is Elikim Yichanenu, each one with a number, and the same for the capital of the pasuk of Yismuchu. Now, this was Hashkacha Pratis that I decided to do this class today because there's a problem over here. And that is, what today is which day of the Omer? Hayom, I think today is 31, right? Hayom Echad U'Shloshim Yom, Shehem, Arba Shavuos U'Shloisha Yomim. Is that correct? Okay. So, what is the letter? Open up your annotated siddur. Open up to look at the day of 31 for the Omer. What is the letter of the pasuk Yismuchu to have in mind for today? Very good. The vav of which word? Of the word Mishar. Yeah? Now turn over to page 140. And the very top line of the page, look at the word Mishar. It's the fourth word from the end of the page. There is no vav. Right? That's because whoever put together the annotated siddur didn't get the memo. And he just copied Lam Natzeich without actually thinking about what he was doing. But if you look in the original, in the Shar Kavanos, it says that in order that when you say, even though in the original in Tehillim we spell Mishar without a vav, but for the purposes of Sfiras Omer, you have to add a vav into the word Mishar in order to make it 49 letters. And he says the word L'umim is supposed to be without a vav, as it is in an annotated siddur as well. And the words Tishpoit, I'm sorry, not Mishar. What's today? Today is Tishpoit or Mishar? Today is Mishar, yeah? Tishpoit and Mishar both have to have a vav, and both of those vavs that you need to add to the pasuk in order to make it 49 letters, whoever put together the annotated siddur missed the memo. So Hashkacha Pratis that I decided to give this class today, but this is not a mistake in the Arizal. The Chaim Vital writes clearly that there's 49 letters, making sure that you spell the words Tishpoit and Mishar with an extra vav. If I'm going to submit all my corrections online to the annotated siddur, I'll be ousted from Chabad. Do they have the old siddur there?
Oh, Rabbi Posner was the editor.
I don't think he was the editor. I think he was a editor.
His name is first, so I call him the editor.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe Rabbi proposed and forgot to look up the. Yeah. Anyway, fine. Now, but again, you look at the number. And by the way, this system that I've done here with the numbers, I didn't make this up. Now, I haven't yet seen a Chabad siddur that does this, but there are other siddurim today, modern siddurim that do this, not with 1, 2, 3, with Aleph, Beis, Gimel. But it's not a new thing, and I have actually here a copy of a very old siddur of the Arizal. I think it's the siddur of Asher, maybe. Yeah. Here you can see. Again, it's hard to see from far, but you can see Elikim, and there's a small aleph on top of it. Yichanenu, there's a small base on top of it, and then here they have Yismuchu with letters corresponding to give you that visual to be able to keep everything in mind that you're supposed to be having in mind. It's a lot of kavanos to balance. You have first of all, on a very basic level, al pi halacha, when you say the bracha, you need to be thinking what night is tonight. When you say the bracha, you need to know that I'm going to count 32, which are 4 days and 4 weeks and 4 days. Yeah, you need to know that. Okay.
That has my phone, but in the app, it's got all these random letters everywhere.
Yes, in the app and something, I think they make it highlighted or they make it red or whatever. There's different ways of doing it. To me, the number way is good because to do it highlighted, you could only do it on a screen or you have to do every day another one. Here you have one page and there's a number for each one. It's much more simple to do. It took me a little fiddling around on my computer to create this, but it took me 2 minutes, like 5 minutes, whatever. Fine. Now, at the very end, it says that you're supposed to say this capital. And by the way, this capital, so here this capital is different than the other kavanos, because the other kavanos are about kavanos. You're supposed to have in mind X. And then, so we also say something, we say, here the ikar is to say the capital. And when you say the capital, you're supposed to have in mind this and this. So it's a little bit different. By the way, in the Siddur Harizal, another time in the day that you say Lamatzeh, this same capital is after Tikkun Chatzos. When you wake up at midnight to mourn and lament over the Beis HaMikdash, you're also part of the text is this capital, and it says that when you're saying Tikkun Chatzos during the days of the Omer, you should have in mind the appropriate letters and words from this capital. So it's not associated strictly with counting the Omer, it's just in general. Okay. Now, let's move on to the Yisuk and Masha Pagamti.
Which capital are we?
Samach Zayin. We also say it every morning before Baruch Shama.
It starts Lamatzeh. Turn the page.
Okay.
This one, but we start with here. Okay. With Lamatzeh.
Now, okay. Now let's move back to the Yisuk Masha Pagamti. This prayer that we say after Sfiras Omer, Yisuk Masha Pagamti. So there are various. Again, the Arizal himself didn't compose this prayer. This prayer is originally found in Sidurim of the Arizal. In other words, Sidurim which correspond to the kavanos of the Arizal. So exactly who authored it, I don't know. The interesting thing is, and again, we're kind of trying to cram a lot into a small amount of time here. There are different iterations and different versions of this prayer. Some of them, for example, are not designed to be said every day, but rather once a week. Once a week, at the end of the first week, you say that whatever I was pogim in the sphere of chesed should be fixed. And at the end of the second week, not on a nightly basis, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. Now, what's the Alter Rebbe's nusach? So if you look in the very first print that we have, the earliest print of the Alter Rebbe's Siddur that we have is printed in the city of Shklov in Tov Kuf Samach Gimel. I think Tov Kuf Samach Gimel corresponds to 1803. I'm pretty sure, from what I recall, that is in fact the second printing of the Alter Rebbe Siddur, but the very first printing of the Alter Rebbe Siddur does not have any known surviving copy. So the earliest copy of the Alter Rebbe Siddur that we have is the one printed in Shklov and Tov Kuf Samach Gimel, and I have here pictures of it, and there's a number of differences, but one of the differences is that it says, over here it says, the way we say it, in the merit of the Sfiras Omer that I counted today, it should be rectified, Yisuk Masha Pagamti B'Sfira, it should be rectified what I was blemished in the Sfira, which one? And then it says, say the Sfira that is for that day. So Chesed, Shebechesed, Gur, Shebechesed, etc. In the original Alter Rebbe Siddur, first of all, it doesn't say the word today, and it doesn't say, it just says Sfira Ploini, and there's strong room to argue, and again, I don't have time to go through all the proofs right now, but that the original Nusach of the Alter Rebbe, even though I think they were already saying it every day, not just at the end of the week, if I recall correctly over here, but they didn't say Chesed Shebechesed Gvura Shebechesed. Every day of the first week, they said Yisukah Masha Pagamti B'Sfiras Chesed, and every day of the second week, they said Yisukah Masha Pagamti B'Sfiras Gvura. To break it down further than that, to say that today I should rectify Chesed Shebechesed and tomorrow Gvura Shebechesed, that's a much later development. I don't know how much later, but it's again the first time it printed, the first time that appeared in print in the Nusach of the Alter Rebbe Siddur was in Tov Reish Chaf something. So you're moving already on to about 50. That we said 1803. What did I say? 18 Tov Samach Gimel is 1803. Tov Reish Chaf is you're talking 1865. Right, so it's about 60 years later that that you have in print in Alter Rebbe Siddur that you should say Chesed Shebechesed, as far as I recall.
During his lifetime?
No. So I want to get to the Alter Rebbe's attitude, but I think that this is important because if I tell you, today you're supposed to rectify Tiferes Shabahoid. Do me a favor, what's Tiferes Shabahoid? Yeah. Now, I'm not saying people have tried to do it. You could go, Simon Jacob, some people have tried to think, but to actually make a breakdown of every one of the 40, what am I supposed to work on today? You give me 49 different things to work on. It's very vague. Whereas, if you say, no, in general, this week work on Chesed, this week work on Gvura, this week work on Tiferes, that, again, it's nuanced and there's overlap and it might be hard to sort of work on 7 distinct different things, but it's already much more of a manageable task than 49 things. And again, that's why I was emphasizing before. Originally, this idea that you have in mind, chesed b'chesed, gvura b'chesed, that's not talking about what I'm rectifying and working on myself. That's talking about in the spheres. What I'm working on myself is chesed, gvura, tiferes, netzach, hod, yesod, malchus. That's it. Now, again, the time is, I've written this all up, and if anybody, it's in Hebrew, but I didn't sort of publish it anywhere, at least not yet, but I think this is important. Now, this leads to, Yosef just asked, was this in the Alter Rebbe's lifetime? What? Was it? Yeah, he passed. I hope, I'm saying that, I went through this a couple of weeks ago. I hope the dates that I'm giving are actually accurate. Let's see. Anyway, one thing, it does seem clear, it's possible that I'm mixing up some of the details of the dates a little bit, but it does seem clear that the original nusach was to just say every day, chesed, gvura, tiferes, meaning every day of the first. Either you say it once a week, or even if you say it every day of the week, but every day you're saying the same thing. The whole first week you're saying Sfiras Chesed, the whole second week you're saying Sfiras Gvura, etc. Now, the truth is that in the Alter Rebbe's Torah itself, you do already have in the Alter Rebbe's Memorim this idea that there's 49 days of the Omer, and every person has 7 midas, and the 7 midas are each comprised of 7. So there's 49 details of midas to work on. That you already have in the Alter Rebbe's Torah itself. But again, I don't think you have in the Alter Rebbe's Torah sort of specific things that every day you're supposed to work on chesed shebechesed, gvura shebechesed. It's more of a generic thing that there's 40. The reality is that there's 49 aspects and 49 days of the Omer, and in general, Sfiras Omer is the time when you work on your character. And in the footnote here, I did note that you may be able to trace that in the Mittel Rebbe's Hanocha of his father's Maimer, there's less breakdown than there is in the Tzemach Tzedek's Hanocha of this same Maimer. So what that might indicate is that this idea of breaking it down into working on Chesed, Shebechesed, Gvura Shebechesed, etc., that is something which came later under the influence of the Tzemach Tzedek's Chassidus. That is it's a suggestion, it's certainly not proven. Now, I saw a Maimer from the Rebbe, a Maimer that the Rebbe said on Lag BaOmer Tovshin Yud Aleph, so that's the first, 1951, that's the first Lag BaOmer that the Rebbe is serving as Rebbe, and the Rebbe said a Maimer about Sfiras Omer. And over there, there's a very interesting thing. The Rebbe explains, goes through Machlokas and Nigla and explains it al pi Chassidus. So basically, let's try and keep it brief. He brings out the opinion of the Rabbeinu Yerucham. There's Machlokas, if nowadays where we don't have an actual Omer, is the mitzvah to count the Raisa the Rabbanan. So, is it a biblical mitzvah to count, or only if you don't have an actual Omer, it's only a rabbinic mitzvah to count? Rabbeinu Yerucham has an interesting view where he says that the mitzvah to count, there's 2 mitzvahs. There's the mitzvah to count the days, and the mitzvah to count the weeks. So Rabbeinu Yerucham says that counting days, that is a biblical mitzvah even nowadays. But counting the weeks, that means that you say, today is 7 days, which is 1 week for the Omer, that the mitzvah to say for the weeks, that is only biblical in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, not nowadays. So the Rebbe says that al pi Chassidus, we could say that there's working on the very specific character traits, and there's working on my core chesed, my core gvura, my core. In other words, what I think the Rebbe is saying is that you could look at it the other way around. When I tell you work on something very specific, where you have 49 specific things, what that means is, don't kriech into your kishkas of what's the status, what darga your neshama is on. Just in practice, how do you behave? How do you talk? How do you behave? How are you as a human being? work on that, work on the practical side of it. Whereas if I tell you to work on chesed, gvura, just on 7 things, then I'm telling you to krich into your kishka, so to speak, and work on your very core essence of your neshama. So the Rebbe is saying that idea of working on the very core essence of your neshama, that's something which is beyond our capacity, and therefore nowadays there's no real biblical mitzvah to count the weeks. Whereas working on the very specifics, that's something that we can, that is doable to us. So it's interesting that the Rebbe sort of twists it that way, but I think that in a way this might give us a much more relatable way to think of it. That even though in practice, when we say the Sfiras Omer, I'm saying Yesur Kamasham Pagamti B'Sfira Gvura Shabahid. Now, could you explain to me what the difference? What exactly should I work on Hoyt Gvura versus Gvura Shabahid? I don't know, but I think that perhaps a takeaway from the way the Rebbe presents it over here is that not necessarily work on yourself, meaning work on yourself in a very detailed way. Take specific behaviors and specific thought patterns and specific habits and specific modes of behavior and relating with the people around you and relating to Hashem, etc., and work on it in a very specific way. Have target hachlotus. I have this habit, I have this good habit, I have this bad habit, I tend to get into this type of routine. Work on it in a very specific way. Not so much to figure out whether this is shaykh to the night of Hoyt Shebegvura or Gvura Shebahoid, which might be, which not might be, I'm sure that's a very worthwhile investigation, but
your battery ran out.
Okay, but beyond trying to figure out what exactly Hoyt Shebegvura and Gvura Shebahoid is, we're telling you, when we tell you work on 49 things, we mean work on yourself in a very specific, broken down, bite-sized, practical way, rather than telling you work on your very core. So essentially, sort of, if you could say, we started with this kind of question like, come on, this seems so abstract, like this, that, the other, it means nothing to me. So even though the Rebbe is saying it the other way around, I think the point is the same. That right, we're not telling you to work on these very abstract things. That's something which for most people is not within their realm of capacity. But on the contrary, we're breaking it down into 49 to tell you should be working on very specific things. Okay, there's probably more to be said, but especially as when the mic died, I just want to finish off that there's another whole interesting aspect here to figure out how the spread of these ideas became so spread, how this was received by the poskim. And you see certainly in some poskim that they're okay with the Lam Natseach, but they're not so okay with the rest of it. But that's really a topic for another time. Please turn off the video. Thank you.